It was just another regular afternoon for Marcus. He had finished his work at the small mechanic shop he owned and was enjoying a rare moment of quiet. The sun was shining and the air was warm, but not too hot. He decided to take a walk through his neighborhood to clear his mind and enjoy the peace. His neighborhood was small, with tree-lined streets and houses spaced far apart. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and most days were calm and uneventful. As he walked, Marcus couldn't help but admire how calm everything seemed. People were outside working in their gardens, children were playing on the sidewalks, and the sound of distant laughter filled the air. It was a peaceful place, a place where nothing ever went wrong. But Marcus wasn't paying attention to the surroundings. His mind wandered as he thought about his day and the tasks waiting for him back at home. Just as he turned the corner of his street, he heard something that caught his attention. It wasn't the usual sounds of the neighborhood. It was a child's cry. At first, Marcus thought it was just someone playing, but then the sound came again, louder and filled with fear. His heart raced. Marcus quickly moved toward the sound, his instincts kicking in. He rounded another corner, and that's when he saw it. Two men were dragging a young boy toward a van parked at the edge of the street. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. His face was pale with fear, and his hands were tied. He struggled to break free, but the two men held him tightly. For a split second, Marcus hesitated. He didn't know what to do. His mind raced, but before he could think, something inside him clicked. Without a second thought, he took off running toward the van. The kidnappers didn't notice him until he was almost on top of them. Marcus dove at one of the men, tackling him to the ground with all his strength. The man shouted in surprise, but Marcus didn't stop. He quickly moved to the other kidnapper, who had turned to run. Marcus caught him just in time, grabbing him by the arm and throwing him to the ground. The boy, still in shock, was now standing just a few feet away, his wide eyes locked on Marcus. The young child looked confused but grateful. Marcus glanced over to make sure the kidnappers were no longer a threat. One was down, and the other was struggling to get up. The sound of sirens in the distance signaled the arrival of the police. By the time they pulled up, Marcus had already tied the two men with a length of rope he had found nearby. He stood back, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "Thank you. Thank you so much," the boy's mother said, rushing over to hug him once the police took the kidnappers into custody. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she held her son tightly, not letting him go. Marcus smiled awkwardly and gave a small nod, uncomfortable with all the attention. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, shaking his head. The boy's mother tried to insist, but Marcus wasn't interested in the praise. He only wanted to go back to his quiet life, the life he had before any of this had happened. But as he walked away, something nagged at him. It wasn't over yet. Something about the entire situation didn't sit right with him. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that his peaceful life was about to change forever. The next few days felt strange for Marcus. Ever since the incident with the young boy, everything seemed a little different. People in his neighborhood looked at him with admiration, giving him smiles and nods as he walked past. He tried his best to ignore it. He didn't want to be anyone's hero. He was just a regular guy, doing what anyone would do in a dangerous situation. Despite his discomfort with the attention, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had saved the boy's life, and that was something he would never forget. But there was more to it than that. The moment he had tackled the kidnapper, something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just about saving the boy. It was about doing the right thing when it mattered most. And that was something Marcus knew deep down he could never ignore. The media quickly caught wind of what had happened. News vans began to appear outside his house, trying to interview him about the rescue. He didn't want to talk to them. Marcus wasn't interested in the spotlight. He just wanted to return to his normal life. But the story of the local hero was spreading fast. The boy's parents kept calling to thank him, and even the police wanted to meet with him again, this time to express their gratitude. Marcus refused the police invitation. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He wasn't the type of person who craved attention. Still, his life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. Everywhere he went, he was reminded of what had happened, and people now looked at him differently. One evening, as he was sitting on his porch, trying to relax after a long day, Marcus noticed something unusual. A sleek, black SUV was parked at the end of his street. It wasn't the usual cars that drove by. This one stood out, looking out of place in the quiet residential neighborhood. Marcus had seen it before, but he couldn't remember where. At first, he thought nothing of it. Maybe it was just someone visiting a neighbor. But as the evening passed, the SUV didn't move. It remained parked there, quietly watching his house. The next day, it was there again. And the day after that. Each time, it seemed to be parked in the same spot, facing his front door. Marcus felt a twinge of unease. Was he being paranoid? He didn't think so. Something about it just didn't feel right. Marcus decided to keep an eye on the SUV. Every time he walked to the corner store or checked his mail, he would glance at the parked vehicle. The same black SUV, always empty, always waiting. It had been days now, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The feeling grew stronger as the days passed. He couldn't shake the strange sensation that something was coming, something he wasn't prepared for. The SUV's presence was like an itch he couldn't scratch, and the more he saw it, the more he began to feel like he was being pulled into something he didn't understand. At night, when the quiet settled over his neighborhood, Marcus tried to sleep, but the image of that black SUV haunted his thoughts. Who was behind it? And why were they watching him? He didn't know the answers, but one thing was certain. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning. His quiet, peaceful life had already been disrupted once, and he feared it wouldn't be long before it happened again. As the days went by, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time he looked out his window, the black SUV was still there, parked quietly at the end of his street. It seemed to follow a pattern, appearing in the early morning and remaining until the late evening, never moving, just waiting. Sometimes Marcus thought he saw a figure sitting inside, but when he looked closer, the windows were always tinted too dark to make out any details. At first, he tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence, but the longer it continued, the more uneasy he felt. Was he being paranoid? Maybe he was overthinking it. After all, it could have just been a random car. But deep down, Marcus knew something wasn't right. One evening, as the sun set and the cool breeze picked up, Marcus walked out to his porch. He had just finished his dinner and wanted to get some fresh air. He glanced at the street, and sure enough, the SUV was there. This time, though, the driver's side window was rolled down slightly. A thin white envelope was hanging out, and Marcus saw it clearly as he walked by. Curiosity got the best of him. He hesitated for a moment, but then he picked up the envelope. It was addressed simply, Marcus. The handwriting on the envelope was neat and professional, but Marcus couldn't recognize it. He stood there, staring at the envelope for a few seconds, wondering if he should open it. But then he remembered the warning note the kidnappers had left him. This wasn't the first strange thing to happen since he had saved the boy, and he didn't want to make any hasty decisions. Finally, with a deep breath, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Marcus quickly read the words. "We know what you did. Meet us at 3 p.m. tomorrow, or there will be consequences." His stomach dropped. He had been right. The SUV wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever was behind it knew about the kidnapping. They knew about him. For a few seconds, Marcus stood frozen. What was this? Who were these people? And what did they want with him? The message was clear. He had no choice but to meet them. But what if he didn't? What would happen to him or his family? The thought of his family brought Marcus back to his senses. He couldn't put them at risk. He had to go. but he had no idea what he was walking into. He needed answers. After a long, tense moment, Marcus made a decision. He would go to the meeting, but he had to be careful. He couldn't just walk into whatever trap they had set for him. He needed help. He thought about calling the police, but would they be able to protect him from whatever this was? He wasn't sure. Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the boy he had saved. Was this connected to the people who had kidnapped him? Why were they coming after Marcus now? There were too many questions and no clear answers. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind raced as he thought about the meeting the next day. He had to be prepared for anything. As he lay in bed, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown hanging over him. The quiet life he once knew was gone, and now he was about to face something much bigger than he had ever imagined. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his life was no longer his own. The note he had found in the black SUV was more than just a warning. It felt like an invitation to something dangerous, something he wasn't ready for. But the more he thought about it, the more he knew he had no choice. He had to find out who was behind all this, and he had to do it on his own terms. The next day, as he walked through his neighborhood, Marcus's mind was spinning. He tried to act normal, to go about his day, but it was impossible. Everywhere he looked, he half expected to see that black SUV watching him. He had already decided he would go to the meeting, but when it came to it, he wasn't sure what to expect. Would there be a trap? Or was this a chance for him to take control of the situation? Around noon, Marcus left his house and walked toward the meeting spot. He hadn't told anyone about the note. He didn't want to put anyone else in danger. The place he was going to wasn't far from his home, an old warehouse on the edge of town. It wasn't a place where people went unless they had to. It was quiet, isolated, and perfect for people who didn't want to be found. As he got closer, Marcus's heart raced. The streets were empty, and the only sounds were his footsteps echoing on the pavement. He was nearly at the warehouse when he saw the familiar sight of the black SUV parked near the entrance. The same vehicle, the same feeling of unease washed over him. He took a deep breath and walked toward the SUV, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. As he approached, the door to the SUV opened slowly, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, and his expression was unreadable. There was something cold about him, something that made Marcus's gut twist. The man didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, watching Marcus with a steady gaze. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt thick with tension, as if the slightest movement could set everything off. "Marcus," the man finally said, his voice calm but firm. "I see you came alone." "Good." Marcus didn't reply right away. He studied the man carefully. Who was he? Why was he involved in all this? And what did they want from him? The man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "You don't know me, but I know you. You've caused a bit of a stir, saving that boy. People don't like that. And now you're involved in something much bigger than you realize." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The man's words sent a chill down his spine. Much bigger? What did that mean? "You saved that boy from us," the man continued. "That wasn't supposed to happen. But you did it, and now we have to deal with the consequences. But you're not just some bystander, are you? You're a player in this game now." Marcus clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. He had to understand what was going on. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear building inside him. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We don't want anything from you, Marcus, but we do need something. Something you're in a unique position to help with." Marcus didn't trust the man, and every instinct told him he needed to be careful. But he also knew this was the only way to find out what was really going on. "I'm not interested in any games," Marcus said, his voice low and firm. The man's smile faded, and he nodded, as if he expected that response. "You'll change your mind. They'd always do. Meet us tomorrow, same time, same place. We'll have more to discuss." With that, the man turned and got back into the SUV, leaving Marcus standing there in the silence of the warehouse parking lot. His mind was racing with questions. What had he just gotten himself into? And who were these people, really? Marcus couldn't sleep that night. His mind kept racing with the words of the man in the SUV. "You're a player in this game now." What did that even mean? He couldn't stop thinking about it. He didn't want to be involved in some dangerous game, especially not with people who seemed so powerful and threatening. But it was too late. He was already in it, and there was no turning back now. He tried to go about his day, but it was impossible to focus. Every time he stepped outside, he felt as though eyes were watching him, tracking his every move. The black SUV was still there, parked across the street, just like the night before. It was always there, waiting, silent. By the time evening rolled around, Marcus had made up his mind. He wasn't going to sit back and let these people control them. He had to find out who they were and what they wanted from him. The meeting had been set for tomorrow, and he wasn't going to back down. But even as he prepared, a cold feeling settled in his chest. Something wasn't right. It was as if he was walking into a trap, and he had no idea how deep it went. The man in the SUV had mentioned something about consequences, and Marcus couldn't shake the thought that he was about to face something far worse than he could imagine. That night, he locked up his house, double-checking all the doors and windows. He wanted to feel safe, but he couldn't. His peaceful life had been torn apart, and now he was on edge, unsure of who to trust or what to expect. He had no idea who these people were or what they were capable of. The black SUV had shown up again, parked just as it always was. But this time, Marcus couldn't ignore the feeling that the people inside were watching him, waiting for him to make his move. As he sat in his living room, nervously glancing out the window, the phone rang. Marcus jumped, startled by the sound. It was a private number, one he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Marcus," the voice on the other end said, a low, calm tone that sent a chill through his body. "We know you're nervous. You should be. Tomorrow, you'll make a decision, one you won't be able to undo." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. His heart was racing now. The words felt like a warning, but also a threat. Who were these people? And why did they seem so powerful? He couldn't understand why they were going after him. All he had done was save a little boy from danger. Was that really enough to put him in the middle of something so big, so dangerous? He sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. Was he in over his head? The meeting was tomorrow, and he had no idea what was going to happen. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let fear control him. If he was going to survive whatever was coming, he needed to stay calm, stay focused, and figure out who was behind it all. The rest of the night passed in silence, and the uneasy feeling of being watched never left him. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to sleep, but sleep didn't come. When morning finally came, Marcus knew he had no choice but to follow through with the meeting. He had to find out what these people wanted and what he had gotten himself into. But as he got ready to leave, the phone rang again. Marcus stood in front of the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made the decision to go through with it. He had no idea what awaited him inside, but he was determined to find out. The black SUV was parked nearby, just as it had been before, the dark windows hiding the faces of whoever was watching him. He took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy metal door of the warehouse. Inside, the air was cold and musty. It smelled like old wood and dust, and the only sound was the echo of his footsteps as he walked deeper into the building. The place was dark, but a few dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the walls. It was almost as if the warehouse had been abandoned for years. But Marcus knew better. He could feel the presence of others, hidden in the dark. As he moved further in, a voice called out from the shadows. "Marcus," the voice said, calm and steady. "I'm glad you decided to come." Marcus froze. He couldn't see the speaker, But the voice was familiar. It was the same man from the SUV, the man who had warned him yesterday. The voice carried with it a sense of power, a quiet confidence that made Marcus uneasy. "I didn't have much of a choice," Marcus replied, his voice echoing through the empty space. A figure stepped out of the shadows, tall and dressed in a dark suit, just like the man he had seen before. This time, though, there was something different about him. There was an air of danger around him, something that made Marcus instinctively take a step back. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, I suppose you didn't," he said. "But now that you're here, we can finally talk." Marcus didn't speak. He just watched as the man took a few slow steps forward, his movements deliberate. "You're probably wondering who we are," the man continued, "and why we've been keeping an eye on you." He paused for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. "Let's just say we have an interest in people like you, people who take matters into their own hands when they shouldn't." Marcus clenched his fists, his thoughts racing. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. "I saved a boy. That's all." The man's smile widened, but there was no kindness in it. "Oh, we know you did. And that's exactly why you're here. You're a problem now, Marcus. You've interfered with something bigger than you can imagine. But we can fix that. We just need your help." Marcus felt a wave of anger rise within him. "Help you? What do you mean?" The man stepped closer, his voice low and serious. "We have our ways. We have people in power, people who know how to get things done. You, Marcus, you're just a small part of a much larger plan. And now that you've shown you can act when needed, you're a valuable asset to us." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. "I don't want to be part of your plan. I just want to go home." The man's expression remained unchanged. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice cold. "You can't walk away from this. Not now. Not after what you've done." Marcus took a step back, his mind spinning. He didn't want to be involved in anything dangerous, but he was already in too deep. There was no turning back now. Before he could speak again, the man raised his hand, signaling for someone behind him. Two other figures stepped into view, both dressed in similar dark suits. One of them held a folder, which he handed to the man. The man glanced at the contents of the folder and then looked at Marcus. "You'll be given a choice soon. We just need you to understand what's at stake. You'll have your chance to decide what happens next. But for now, remember, there's no turning back." The man's words echoed in Marcus's mind as he left the warehouse. There's no turning back. Marcus had been given a lot to think about, but nothing had made sense. He wasn't sure who these people were or what they wanted from him, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't good. He had hoped that walking into that dark warehouse would help him understand what was happening, but now he only had more questions. As he made his way home, Marcus felt the weight of his decision pressing on him. He had been told he would have a choice soon. What did that mean? He didn't want to get any deeper into whatever this was, but the men in the warehouse had made it clear. He couldn't just walk away. The thought made his stomach twist in knots. How had his life turned into this? It all started so simply. He'd just saved a boy from kidnappers. Now he was in the middle of something dangerous, with no clear way out. When he got home, Marcus locked the door and double-checked the windows, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave him. He couldn't stop thinking about the man's cold smile and the two other figures who had stepped into the warehouse. What were they planning? And why him? That night, Marcus barely slept. Every little sound made him jump, and he kept wondering if someone was out there, watching him. It felt like his peaceful life had been stolen, replaced by constant fear and uncertainty. The next morning, he received another call. This time, the voice on the other end was different, more formal, more demanding. It was clear these people weren't just playing around. "Marcus," the voice said, "it's time for you to make your decision. We're giving you two options. You can join us, and we'll help you succeed, or you can refuse and face the consequences. There's no middle ground. Think carefully." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. His heart was pounding in his chest as he sat down on the couch. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to walk away from all of this. But the cold reality hit him again. He couldn't just walk away. Marcus was trapped. He didn't know how far these people's reach went or what they were capable of, but he knew he couldn't risk putting his family or anyone he cared about in danger. The weight of the decision hung heavy on his shoulders. He sat there, staring at the phone in his hands, trying to think. Could he really join them? What did they mean by success? And if he refused, what would happen to him? There was no way to know. But as the minutes passed, he realized there was only one thing he could do: go to the meeting again. He had to face whatever came next and find a way out. He couldn't let fear control him. It was time to take control of his own future, even if it meant making a dangerous choice. Marcus stood up, taking a deep breath. Whatever he decided, he knew it wouldn't be easy. But he had no choice. He couldn't let these people control his life any longer. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he drove toward the meeting place once again. He had made his decision. He wasn't going to be controlled. He had no idea what these people wanted, but he had to take the next step. He couldn't sit back any longer. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The warehouse loomed ahead, standing silent and dark in the distance. The black SUV was parked in the same spot it had been before. The same ominous feeling washed over him as he parked his car. It was like walking into a trap, but Marcus didn't have time to second-guess himself. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the entrance of the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced, but his steps were steady. This time, he was determined to find out who was behind all of this. He couldn't let them dictate his life anymore. As he entered the warehouse, the same man who had greeted him earlier appeared from the shadows. His face was as cold and expressionless as before, but there was a certain sense of control in his posture. He was confident, and it was clear he expected Marcus to be intimidated. "You've made the right choice," the man said, his voice smooth and calm. "We knew you would come around." Marcus didn't respond. His eyes scanned the room, looking for any signs of danger. The two other figures were there as well, standing silently in the background. But this time, something felt different. It was as if there was a plan in motion, something more than just a meeting. "I've made a choice," Marcus said, his voice firm, "but I still don't know what you want from me." The man smiled, his gaze never leaving Marcus. "We want you to be part of something bigger, something that can change everything. We've seen what you're capable of. And now, it's time for you to join us." Marcus took a step back, the weight of the situation settling on him. He was standing in front of people who didn't care about his life. They only cared about what he could do for them. The choice wasn't really his at all. "What happens if I refuse?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man's expression remained unchanged. "If you refuse, there will be consequences. You've already seen the lengths we're willing to go to. We don't take kindly to people who get in our way." Marcus swallowed hard. The words were clear, and they sent a chill through him. He had no idea what kind of people these were, but he knew they meant business. For a moment, Marcus stood there, weighing his options. Was it really worth joining them? Could he make a difference if he did, or would he just be another pawn in their game? The man watched him carefully, as if waiting for an answer. "You don't have to decide right now," he said, his voice almost friendly. "But think about it. You have a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself, to have power, to make things happen." Marcus clenched his fists. Power wasn't what he wanted. He just wanted to live a normal life. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no way out. If he refused, there was no telling what would happen to him or the people he loved. He had no choice but to play along, for now. "I'll join you," he said, his voice low but steady. The man's smile returned, but this time it was different. It was cold, calculating. "Good. We knew you'd make the right choice." The days after Marcus agreed to join the mysterious group were a blur. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. The group, whatever it was, had power. They were connected to people in high places, and they knew how to get things done. But Marcus still didn't trust them. He had agreed to cooperate, but that didn't mean he had to like it. For the first time in weeks, Marcus sat down at his kitchen table and took a long, deep breath. It was hard to think clearly, to process everything that had happened. He had gone from saving a little boy from kidnappers to being part of something much bigger than he could ever have imagined. He had been forced into a world of secrets, threats, and power. But now he had to find a way to use it to his advantage. The man in the warehouse had told Marcus that this was just the beginning. Now that he had agreed to join, things would change. He would be given tasks, missions, things to do for the group. But Marcus wasn't interested in blindly following orders. He needed to find a way out. He needed to make a plan. The next few days were tense. He went through the motions, attending meetings and following orders, but all the while, he was watching, waiting. The more he learned about the group, the more he realized how dangerous they were. Their reach extended far beyond what he could see. They controlled people, made things happen without anyone knowing. They had power, but they also had enemies. And Marcus knew that sooner or later, he would have to choose a side. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, looking out the window. He had been given a task, something he wasn't sure he could do. The group had asked him to handle a delicate situation, but Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to be a part of it. It was too risky, too dangerous. He had already seen what happened to people who crossed the group. They didn't just walk away. But Marcus wasn't like the others. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his life. He knew he had to find a way to use the power he had been given for something good. Maybe he couldn't get out just yet, but he could make a difference from the inside. He could take control of his own fate, even if it meant playing the game for a while longer. That night, Marcus made a decision. He would stay in the game for now, but he would be smart about it. He would gather information, build connections, and wait for the right moment. The group had underestimated him. They thought they could control him, but Marcus was starting to realize that he was in a position to control his own future. The next day, when he walked into the meeting room, he held his head high. He had a plan. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He would use their power to his advantage, and when the time was right, make his move. He was no longer afraid. It was time to take charge of his own destiny. And as he walked out of the meeting, ready for whatever came next, Marcus knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The life he had once known was gone, but it was time to build a new one, on his own terms.